Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we're going to take a look at a very cool Spinosaurus figure, and this is actually a figure that I found randomly on eBay, although I had seen someone point this figure out that they had seen an image of it on Google prior to this, so I was kind of on the lookout for it already because I thought it looked pretty cool. Of course, it's not, your most accurate Spinosaurus in the world, but being a random figure that comes from China with no actual deal or brand, nothing, really related to it, that you're just pretty much clueless as far as where the figure has come from. I didn't expect it to be an accurate, interpretation of a Spinosaurus, but I did see that it was a pretty cool looking interpretation of a Spinosaurus, and I definitely wanted to get a hold of it. So once it actually had shown up on eBay, I placed an order for it pretty quickly, and I'm happy to now have it here in hand. I've had it actually for about a week now. I wanted to pull the Papo Spinosaurus, the limited edition version, out to compare with this, but unfortunately I cannot figure out where I put mine. It's just kind of missing in action at this point in time, and since the storage area where most of my collection sits was such a disaster, I tried finding it there, could not locate it at this point in time. So unfortunately I do not have that figure here to display with it, but you can quite clearly see the similarities between the two, although I don't think this is actually a bootleg of the Papo Spinosaurus, the limited edition version, although it's very similar. I think potentially the inspiration was taken from the Papo one, but if you happen to have the Papo Spinosaurus at home, look at it, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. If you can't see, I have an image right here to put up for you guys, but you could just see that there is a very similar appearance to the figure between the two, but there's also quite a bit of differences between the two overall, like looking at things like the shape of the sail, the head sculpt. There's actually articulated arms on this one. Even the positioning of the legs, although similar, are also different. The tail, as far as like that fin-like tail that we now see associated with Spinosaurus as well, is quite different on this one in comparison to the Papo version. But regardless, the figure still looks really, really cool if you ask me. So let's go ahead and get a closer look at it right now. So starting up here at the head sculpt, you can see that it does sport a very interesting head sculpt, almost like a dragon-like head sculpt in a way when it comes to the head sculpt here of the Spinosaurus, and the kind of like spikes or ridges or whatever you would like to call these that kind of lead up off the top of the head. Very interesting look for a Spinosaurus. I think it's quite creative, unique, different than most, and you can actually see that the sculpting and detailing aspect of the figure is actually really nicely done. Like, there is a lot of detail included up here in the head sculpt of the Spinosaurus. You can see nostrils are present, as well as a really nicely painted eye. The detailing around the eye actually is really nicely done as well, but the eye is painted with a yellow, given a black pupil, and it's actually, and shockingly, very well painted. You can see that it's actually placed perfectly in there and does sport a really nice gloss coat as well, so it has a somewhat realistic look to it. I really like the paint application here on the face as well. You can see it's a very nice like dark brown, but there's a light gray wash that's kind of been included, so it makes that detail pop quite nicely, and in my opinion quite realistically. You can also see some variations of browns, as there's like lighter and darker tones of that darker brown included, and then it also lightens to like a yellowish brown here for the lower jaw, and the transition between those colors I think is quite smooth as well. The jaw is articulated, which you can see, and it works pretty well. It's a little stiff, but I mean, for the most part, it works quite well. The sculpting of the teeth looks okay, and they're painted with a grayish coloration, so not kind of like a bright white, which I can appreciate. I feel like that's an effort to make it seem a little more lifelike, a little more realistic, and it looks pretty good overall. You could also see the inside of the mouth is sculpted quite nicely. As far as like the detailing there on the tongue, you can also see it's painted with a pinkish coloration, but you might also be able to take note, if you're looking right there, if you look in here, you can see straight out of the underside of the mouth. Now that is because once we go over here, you can see there's like this weird area where the jaw doesn't connect perfectly, and I don't know if this is just on mine. When you open the mouth really, really wide, you can now see that that area kind of disappears, but the mouth is open really, really wide at this point for that to disappear. I still think it looks pretty good with its mouth opened at this point, and if I get to the point where I can actually display this figure, this is 100% the way that I would go as far as displaying it, because once I close the mouth, similarly actually to the more recent Schleich Ceratosaurus, when you close the mouth, there's now this very large, like, gaping area where you could see just like the plastic from the inside of the mouth and everything, and it looks very weird, very awkward. I don't know if they all have this because my jaw on this dinosaur seems kind of like it's loose. Like I actually had to push it back pretty far to get it to close correctly and to kind of sit in place. But aside from, that little area, for the most part, I feel like the head sculpt and everything as far as this figure goes looks pretty nice, and definitely a very surprisingly nice looking area of the figure. Leading back here into the neck, you can continue to see lots of those kind of ridges sticking up on the back of the Spinosaurus. You can see like a very large ridge line that runs along the spinal column, but then also kind of like almost like an armored type of a ridge line that continues to run along the side of the neck as well. Some very nice skin texturing going on here in the neck region. Beautiful paintwork as well, with again mixtures of like that yellowish brown, and the darker brown is included, as well as that grayish light wash, which makes the detail again pop really beautifully. As you lead down here into the neck region, you can see lots of really nice skin folding, skin wrinkling going on, just generally the throat of the dinosaur, and some more beautiful scale detail is included in that area as well. Leading back into the body, you can see lots more of those kind of like scoots that continue to run the course of the Spinosaurus. You can see leading down here into that front arm there that it is very muscular, extremely muscular, definitely been hitting the gym. You can also see kind of like an area here on the back that almost like insinuates sort of like a fin type of an area leading off of the arm of the Spinosaurus. That is very different. That's something that you don't often see associated with Spinosaurus, and it's a very unique take on this figure compared to many others. Moving down here into the hand, you can see a nice scoot-like appearance down the course of the hand. Again, some more really nice paint application, and you can also pick up on that light gray wash. And then you get down here into the nails. You can see the nails are painted with a nice dark black, very nice and glossy like you would expect them to be. And then moving back up here into the body, you can continue to see how really nicely done the detailing aspect of the figure is, as far as like the texturing of the skin. Like it looks really, really good, and it's beautifully dry brushed over with this brown, so you can see like the yellow underneath, but then the brown kind of highlights all the detail overall, and I think looks pretty realistic. You can also see that rib cage shining through now with that dry brushing that they've applied. Coming up into the sail, you can see the sail also sports a beautifully, very highly detailed look. It also has kind of a curve to the sail, showing some sort of movement here within the Spinosaurus as the sail is kind of waving along. And then you can see that it sports some nice coloration on the sail as well, with a few different variations of browns. You could see like a very nice light brown here for the center, and then it's kind of bordered with a darker brown, and then transitions to a much darker brown, and that darker brown as far as like the outer rim of the sail also sports that light gray wash. And you can see that there is a ridge line that runs along the course of the sail of the Spinosaurus as well. We continue to see more of those scoots that run down the course of the dinosaur, kind of like some very large scales in certain areas, almost like osteoderm-like scales. You can see very nice musculature here as far as the thigh of the Spinosaurus for sure. Really nice kneecap here in the front. You can definitely see a pretty significant seam here where the leg connects, though, so that's a little downside, but I don't ever expect perfection from these random figures that I find on eBay. And then you can also see a pretty nice looking foot sculpt down here. Very nice wash that's been applied there as well, as far as like that light gray wash. Beautifully painted nails, again giving that nice glossy black look. And then coming back up here into the tail, we continue to run out the course of the tail. Again, we could pick up on a seam right there where the tail has been connected, but you can see that the paintwork continues to look really nice overall as far as I'm concerned, with a nice mixture of like that kind of brown dry brushing, and then back here we also have a mixture of the yellow but also that light gray wash, so it all kind of plays and ties together quite nicely, giving the figure, I think, again, a pretty realistic paint scheme, a pretty realistic paint application. And then we run out here into the paddle-like tail for the Spinosaurus. It looks really cool, again, painted beautifully with a mixture of the browns, different variations of browns, and then that light wash really makes everything pop quite nicely. You can see a beautiful curve to the tail as well, and just generally like some movement shown within the paddle-like tail with kind of like curves and bends and stuff. Really nicely done as far as that goes. You can also see the underside sports some pretty nice detailing. Overall, it has a nice grayish coloration down here. I feel like the paint isn't quite as nice here on the underside as what we see on the upper side of the dinosaur, but it still looks pretty good. And then looking at the opposing side, again, the head sculpt looks pretty nice overall. And then again, right here, I had to push the jaw back. You can see a little like gaping hole right here. So I have to kind of push the jaw back into place for it to sit correctly and then for the mouth to close perfectly. Once it's actually in place, there we go. We can get that mouth to close quite nicely, but it's definitely not the best articulated jaw that I've ever seen for sure. You can see the eye, however, is painted really nicely on this side, just like we had seen on the opposing side. And then moving back here into the neck, we continue to see lots of really nice skin wrinkles and skin folds, similar to what we had seen on the previous side. Beautiful paint application, again, very similar to what we had seen on the previous side. And then coming back here into the body, it continues to look, again, pretty much just like we had seen on the other side, because the body isn't really doing anything drastic. For the most part, like the torso here is in just a straightforward position, so you don't see too much difference as far as the movement or anything shown on this side compared to the previous side. The arm sculpt again looks very large, very muscular over here. We again have this almost like a fin-like area sticking off the back of the arm. Very nice scoot-like appearance down the fingers here. And then some pretty nicely painted nails. The larger claw here on the hand of the Spinosaurus is a little bit sloppy paint-wise. You can see it's not perfectly painted, but for the most part it looks pretty good. You can also see the underside of the arms and the palms of the hand and everything also sports some really, really nice sculpt and detail. And as I had said earlier, the arms are actually articulated, which is really interesting to see. And then moving back here into the leg, you can pick up on the hip bone a little bit right there. Again, very nice muscular thigh. We can see the seam again where the thigh picks up and connects to the lower part of the leg in the knee area. You can also see some very nice muscular legs here as far as like the calf area, and then moving down into the foot. Again, nice bend in the foot as it's walking along, or seems to be walking along. Nicely painted nails, just like we had seen on the previous side. And then we run out the course of the tail over here, and that detail continues to honestly look absolutely beautiful. So as far as this figure goes, being just a random Spinosaurus from China, and no named dealer, no named company, almost a bootleg type of a Spinosaurus because it's just so mysterious as far as its origins go, it's actually really quite nice. Now, earlier in the review, I compared it to the Papo Limited Edition Spinosaurus, quite obviously because of the similar appearance, but it's also similar in size. So if we actually get a measurement on our Spinosaurus, it is definitely a pretty large Spinosaurus, probably one of the largest Spinosaurus figures I have now in my collection. You could see it lengthwise is about 14.5 inches, or about 36.5, closing in on 37 centimeters in length. So pretty sizable in the length department. For a height, you're probably going to see roughly right there. Is actually more like back here is probably the highest point. So right under about 5.75 inches, or about the 14.5 centimeter range. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line next to our Spinosaurus figure here, and you can definitely see in comparison to these guys that, again, the Spinosaurus does sport a pretty large size overall, especially when you see it there next to Mr. Papo Rex, who is a pretty big figure. You can definitely see that this Spino is on the larger side for sure. And for another comparison, here are a few of the other Spinosaurus figures that are currently out there on the market, especially when it comes to this style of Spinosaurus, the newest appearance. And you can see that we have the GR Toys Spinosaurus there in the background, and then the newer PNSO version of the Spinosaurus here in the foreground. And you can definitely see that both figures are absolutely gorgeous, but this newest version I think is may not be the biggest, because I think the GR Toys is just a hair longer, but size-wise, it's very similar in the aspect of the GR Toys version, but the PNSO quite obviously is a bit smaller. But regardless, again, showing you that this Spinosaurus is quite large overall. So this Spinosaurus that I found on eBay, again, no name associated with it at all. I have absolutely no idea who created it, but it's still a pretty cool figure, and definitely something that I am quite excited about having now here in my collection. It overall has a very cool appearance to it, a little different than most Spinosaurus figures, sporting an almost dragon-like look in the head sculpt, but still managing to look pretty darn cool overall. And it's funny how they have like such an exaggerated head sculpt as far as like that dragon-like look, but then they still manage to include the newest version as far as like that paddle-like tail to the Spinosaurus, the newest science, kind of mixing accuracy with a very inaccurate look. It's just strange to say it that way, but It's just so weird that they've created the figure like this, but I actually welcome it with open arms because it's something that feels fresh, something that's a little unique and different than most. And I have quite a few now accurate Spinos in my collection, so to have something like this that's a little different than your average Spinosaurus is definitely quite fun, if you ask me. I am very impressed overall in the detailing aspect. Initially, I had thought this was just a straight up bootleg of the limited edition Papo Spinosaurus, and I'm not saying that it may not have some bootleg aspects to it. I don't know for sure if it's just like a custom bootleg, I guess you could say, kind of like they've taken the Papo Spinosaurus, used it as like the base idea for the figure, and then created new areas of the figure on their own. Either that, or they just straight up used the Papo Spinosaurus for inspiration when creating this figure, because the overall body pose is very similar and the overall body appearance is fairly similar, but there is just a lot different on this one in comparison to the Papo offering. And you can see that it looks really cool. Even the areas like the very interesting looking take on the paddle tail on the Spinosaurus is really highly detailed, and overall the Spino sports an incredible amount of detail and sculpt on something like this that is just, like a random unbranded figure. It's just really cool to see something like this show up that's so highly detailed. It has a few downsides as far as like the seams, because the seams are definitely pretty visible in certain areas like the legs and the tail, and there's also some warping that has gone on with the legs, so the legs are definitely warped a bit, which could potentially be fixed with the hot water, cold water trick. And then the articulated jaw is definitely not that good as far as like the underside of the jaw and the way it connects to the figure. Overall, it's just a little bit sloppy as far as that aspect goes, but once it's actually fully open and you don't really see that kind of area underneath, I still think it looks great. And the jaw actually works pretty well as far as like opening and closing. It's just that you sometimes have to push it back into place to get it to look, decent, I guess you could say. The paint application as well is quite nicely done, and another very exciting aspect for a figure like this. As far as an unbranded figure goes, you don't often get such a nice paint application, but I feel like what we have here is really beautifully done with lots of really nice different tones of color, very nice realistic coloration overall. So this figure for sure is an impressive Spinosaurus. Even if it's not your most accurate take, it is still a really highly detailed, really nicely painted Spinosaurus that I personally am very happy to now have here in my collection. So if you would like to pick this up, I will include a link in the description to where you can do that on eBay, where I purchased mine. I think it was roughly like the $20 range, so it's a pretty darn cheap price for a figure that's this size and of this quality. So check the description, go buy yourself this really interesting Spinosaurus if you are in fact interested, and make sure you also like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.